Look around at the global economy right now. Every single country on Earth is sprinting toward the same finish line, and almost nobody is stopping to ask what happens when they all get there. This is the question that could determine which civilizations survive the next 100 years, and which ones quietly collapse while their GDP numbers look fantastic. Right now, there are over 190 countries on Earth. A significant number of them have official national strategies to transition into knowledge economies, tech sectors, digital services, and high-value industries. The World Bank encourages it. The IMF applauds it. Davos celebrates it every single year. Move your workforce up the value chain, they say. Stop growing crops and start writing code. Stop running looms and start running servers. But wheat does not care about your national tech strategy. Cotton does not grow because your finance minister gave a confident speech at a trade conference. Somebody has to plant it, manage it, harvest it, process it, and move it across the world. And if every country is busy building software startups and financial service sectors, the most fundamental question in global economics becomes impossible to ignore. Here's where it gets genuinely alarming. Agricultural employment globally still accounts for around 27% of the entire world's workforce. The textile and apparel industry supports the economies of entire nations. Bangladesh earns over 80% of its export revenue from garments alone. These are not marginal industries. These are the load-bearing walls of civilization. And the transition plan being sold to developing nations assumes automation will simply absorb all of that. But automation is not a country. It is an investment. And investments flow toward profit, not toward need. When wealthy countries deindustrialized across the 20th century, the factories didn't disappear. They moved. Manufacturing shifted to wherever governments offered the most desperate labor at the lowest possible cost. The work relocated, the exploitation relocated with it. And the countries that graduated into service economies congratulated themselves while quietly depending on the countries they left behind to keep their shelves full and their citizens clothed. That pattern cannot repeat infinitely. There is no next tier of countries to absorb displaced agricultural and textile labor when the current tier moves on. At some point, the chain ends. At some point, the last affordable labor market runs out of patience or runs out of people. And when that moment arrives, the entire architecture of global food and textile supply becomes dangerously unstable. There is also a sovereignty argument that almost no government is taking seriously enough. A country that stops producing its own food has handed control of its most critical national security asset to foreign supply chains. We watched this unfold in real time during the pandemic. We watched it again when the war in Ukraine removed two of the world's largest grain exporters from the global market, almost overnight. Countries that had spent decades optimizing for service sector growth suddenly discovered they had no agricultural infrastructure left to fall back on. That is not an economic inconvenience. That is a national vulnerability. The countries that will actually dominate the next century are not the ones that made the cleanest break from agriculture and manufacturing. They are the ones that refuse to treat those sectors as inferior. The Netherlands exports more food value than almost any nation on Earth, despite having almost no land. It did not abandon farming. It made farming into a technology industry. Israel turned desert agriculture into a global export. China never stopped treating food production as a state priority, regardless of how aggressively it expanded its tech sector. The most dangerous economic myth being sold to developing nations right now is that modernization means leaving the land behind. That high technology and food production are two separate roads, and a country must choose one. That is a myth constructed by economies that can afford to outsource their survival to others. Not every country has that luxury, and increasingly, even the ones that thought they did are beginning to realize the ground beneath that assumption is far less stable than it appeared. The countries that figure this out first will not just feed themselves, they will feed everyone else. And in a world where every other nation went all-in on apps and algorithms, that is the most powerful economic position imaginable.